Hey guys, this is Mike and welcome to the podcast. I don't know about you, but I find the world of patents both fascinating and mysterious. The arcane terminology, the seemingly endless number of types of patents, the crazy things that people actually can patent. It's a really interesting and crucial area to understand for many startups, including food tech startups. But I think many people in the space, in food tech and outside food tech, don't really understand the language of patents or the world of patents and how it all works. So I invited Anas Alfara on the show today to talk about just that. Anas is a friend who I met at the SmartCatcher Summit in 2019. I connected with him again at CES this year in Las Vegas. And he's just a really interesting guy because he understands the world of patents from both the big company perspective as well as an inventor perspective, as someone who actually has an idea and goes through the process of getting it patented. By day, he works as the IP and patent manager for Caterpillar, a big, large equipment company I'm sure most of you have heard of. And by night, he's an inventor who invented an automated cooking system that includes all sorts of interesting new ideas. And he got a patent for it. He went through the process and got a patent for it. And so Anas will tell us about that, but he also breaks down the language of patents and the process of applying for one. And just, answers many of the mysteries that seemingly surround this topic, which I find pretty complicated. Even though I spent a lot of time digging through patent databases, I still find a lot of the terms and the whole way in which people go about it is somewhat complicated and mysterious. So I really found this a fun conversation. And I think if you are a founder with a new idea and you're thinking about patenting it, or if you're even someone at a big company with a new idea, I think you'll find the conversation interesting. Before we get started, I just want to let you know we're about 2 months out from SmartCatcher Summit, the Spoon's annual event focused on innovation in the world of food and cooking. It's a virtual event. It's on October 12th, and we'd love to have you there. We have all sorts of cool ideas planned. So go to smartcatchersummit.com to learn more. If you want to come, you can use the discount code PODCAST for 20% off tickets, and I'd love to see you there. All right, that's it for now. Let's get to my conversation with Anas. Hey, well, I'm excited to be here with Anas Alfara, Anas, I've known you for a while now. You came to the SmartCatcher Summit 2019, and we met again at CES in January in Vegas a couple years later. And you're beaming in from afar. You're in Gaza right now, right?
That's correct.
We connected, obviously, because we're both interested in cooking technology, and we'll get to your own kind of inventions. But I think one of the things I thought was interesting, and one of the reasons I wanted you on the podcast is, you spent a lot of your time looking at intellectual property, IP management, and patents. You have your own patent. You manage it for a large company. And so I thought it'd be great because that's an area I think is not as well understood among certainly just generally startups as it should be, the process of that. But also like people I've found in the food tech space oftentimes don't really know how to navigate that. So it's an area you spend a lot of time thinking about.
I can definitely help bring a lot of light to this area. And yes, I agree. It's complicated, typically for the everyday entrepreneur who's not well versed in the space. And there can be a lot of, complexity in navigating it, but it's really not that complex. And I can definitely help bring down the barrier to entry for people who are interested in protecting their intellectual property in that space and other spaces.
One of the things I've always found about patents and kind of intellectual property, it seems like there's a lot of similar ideas that are patented. A lot of times patents oftentimes don't seem to go anywhere. Am I right in this regard? Does it seem like just so many patents are thrown out there into the ether and maybe approved by the patent office, but they oftentimes don't lead to inventions or products?
Yep, you are definitely absolutely right. So I can share a few interesting facts that kind of prove that, right? So fact number one, we have more than 11 million patents today. More than 50% of these patents have been issued only in the last 20 years. So around the year 2000, we only had around 5 million patents. Now we have 11 million patents. So from 1870 or something like that till 2000, we had 5 million patents. And from 2000 to 2020, we've had more than 100% of that amount. So there has been a lot of scaling in terms of the processing of it, but unfortunately you cannot say that it is of good quality. There are lots of questions in terms of enforceability, in terms of how patentable this thing is, and if there are duplicate inventions. There are lots of measures in place to try to avoid that. However, you can't actually, the problem is very complex and requires a lot of effort. Another statistic that almost more than 70% of the patents that get filed get issued. Another interesting statistic that is contrary to that, also around 70% of the patents that get attacked in an inter-parties review or a post-grant review gets canceled, right? So if you go for something, you will get it. If you try to fight it, you can kill it, right? So the thing is, the cost to getting a patent is around, let's say, anywhere from, $10,000 to like $40,000 if you're going to the US. The cost of killing a patent is around, between $300,000 to almost $3 million in some cases, right? So the barrier to entry and obtaining patents is much lower. So that's why you'll see a lot more patents getting issued than, patents getting killed and people fighting over it.
So there's a lot of, I think, phraseology, terminology around patents that like is a mystery to a lot of people who are just laymen and I think just general tech entrepreneurs. So what do you mean by killing a patent?
So killing a patent, let's talk about first what is a patent, right? So a patent is a right of monopoly from the government that is giving you that. Let's talk about the U.S. government here, the United States Patent and Trademark Office. You get certain number of claims at the end of the patent, right? And if you have a product or a service or a process, or a design in terms of design patents or a plant in the case of plant patents, you actually have a monopoly to stop others from making, and importing, exporting, that claimed subject matter for 20 years, right? So what I mean by killing a patent is canceling that claim or canceling the set of claims, right? So if you have a patent that is, issued, you have claims that cover certain subject matter that are disclosed and supported in the patent application. What I mean by killing a patent, which is through, lots of different processes, but some of which is, it's called inter-parties review or post-grant review. You can ask the patent office to review the patent again that they have issued, and you're telling them that, hey, you made a mistake issuing this patent because this prior art exists. This product exists, before this patent was filed. Or, this patent or this publication in a different country, exists and you failed to consider it when you're examining a patent.
So someone who had a patent already issued, that is in a similar area, like I invented a cooking appliance, someone comes out and gets something else patented that seems very similar to me. I want to kill it. I'm effectively saying you patent review office didn't look at the entire scope of like what's out there in terms of prior art. You missed this and you mistakenly issued a patent, and that's killing a patent essentially.
Yep. You're basically telling them, hey, you issued a patent in an error. And the patent office acknowledges that, So they acknowledge that they don't do a great job in terms of examining patents. I've actually trained more than 600 patent examiners and supervisor examiners at the patent office over 6 years, through different programs that rolled over in something called the American Invents Act. So there's the patent examiner training program. There are lectures at the patent office. There is a site enhancement education program where they come to you, right? There are all sorts of trainings because they acknowledge that. And it's not a reasonable expectation to expect the examiner sitting at the patent office understanding what all the inventors are thinking about and being experts in that space at the patent office, right? Like technology is developing way faster than people know how to evaluate it. Right?
Who's the, like the typical patent reviewer, like that's reviewing something to see if it's valid? Are they a subject matter expertise or are they a generalist and saying, I'm just like, I generally understand like innovation, but I'm not an expert in cooking automation, but I'm going to issue a patent because this looks novel to me. I mean, explain who the typical patent reviewer is.
Yeah, so the typical patent reviewer is a generalist, is not a subject matter expert in that field. Typically, they're also incentivized by points, right? So you get a point, for issuing an office action, which is basically comparing certain prior art to, canceling a patent. Sometimes you have a certain quota that you have to issue a certain patents, right? So the incentive system is very different. And a lot of people, unfortunately, don't have the knowledge to find the relevant prior art and to compare it objectively. Also, it is impossible to gather the prior art, out there. So that's another thing, to be fair, right? So because of the new patent, the patent restructuring that happened in 2013, it's called the American Invents Act. Now, almost anything can qualify as a prior art, right? So like, let's say if if it's a PhD thesis indexed by subject, that is written in Japanese, sitting in a public library, can qualify as prior art. How is the examiner going to be able to find that, right? Sometimes you can't. Also, it takes 18 months for some things to surface, right? If you choose to publish a patent, it takes 18 months to publish, right? Examiners, yes, can view it, but, there's a tremendous amount of literature out there, and you're allocated very limited time to actually, do the examination and issue a patent. So it's impossible for people to do a good job. You do see it in some cases, but it's more rare than not.
All right. So someone's filing for a patent, understanding what the term prior art means. Prior art is like someone who comes up with a similar idea, and that might come out in a lot of different formats, whether it's a research paper or a patent application. Like if they're just like talking about it, like on like a podcast or like on a TV show, is that prior art? Like what exactly can be qualified as prior art?
This is such a good question, and it's actually asked in the patent examination exam, like the patent bar exam. So if this podcast is distributed in written format to a certain more than a certain number of people, then it will qualify as a prior art. But an oral presentation, because an oral presentation that was not written down in notes and whatnot, right? It might not qualify as prior art. So there are lots of subjectivity. But if it was converted to become a written paper, and you can search the transcription of the podcast online, and it says, hey, this transcription is available of this date, then actually yes, it qualifies as prior art.
So explain the different types of patents. I know that from my knowledge, there's utility, design, and plant patents. I also there's provisional versus non-provisional. Like, can you briefly give like a quick, very brief tutorial? So,
as you said, you've done most of the work. You know enough. I'll just go maybe a couple of steps more. So the three top umbrellas of patents, the top branches of the tree is the utility, plant, and design application, right? Under utility, there are two kinds of utility application. There's the provisional application, which does not get examined, and there is a non-provisional, or it's called a utility application, and this is the one that gets examined. So some people do not want to go and file, an examination-ready application, but they just want to establish a line in the sand that, hey, this is my idea. I'm still going to work on it, right? More or something. I don't know what's the market acceptance, this or that or whatnot. So they go ahead and they file a provisional patent application. They do, however, have 12 months to convert it to a utility application. If they don't convert it to a utility application and include a claim set in there, then they lose their rights, basically. But if they continue and file a utility application, that utility application that includes the claim set can claim priority to that provisional application, right? So it helps them to preserve their rights for people that come after it. Design patents, basically, it's just covers the ornamental design, of just the shapes of things, doesn't cover the utility or how it's supposed to work or things like that, just purely, the look of things. And plant patents, they cover any asexual generated patents or, like basically plants. You can't just go discover a plant in the wild and file a plant patent on it. You have to asexually reproduce a patent that is not, discovered in the wild and that is not like
a Jerusalem artichoke. The term plant patent, PLANT patent, is referring literally to plants. That's its own kind of patent?
Absolutely. Oh. It is referring to plants, to an actual organic matter of,
I thought it was like an abstracted word plant, like meaning like physical material, but who knows? It
no,
means
it's
plants.
Not planetary or anything like that. No.
All right. So a lot of people will file, you hear the term like on I Watch Shark Tank, right? And people will say, well, Mark Cuban will ask, do you have a patent for that? And the people respond oftentimes, I have a provisional patent. And so what they're saying is, I put my stake in the ground saying I had this idea, but it really doesn't mean anything because you haven't had like a patent reviewer say, oh, this is unique and novel, I'm going to give you a patent. It's just someone actually filled out paperwork.
So here's the thing. When you file for provisional patent application, number one, you don't even need to include, diagrams. You don't need to even include claims in it, nothing. And it does not get examined, right? Also, if you choose, what is really meaningful is to have an issued patent application, with someone who've done and know enough about the space that this is actually novel and unique, even more than the patent office, by someone doing prior art search, and that is very complicated and it's never conclusive, but a subject matter expert will know enough, with some level of research to what is there, what's out there and what is not. But filing a provisional patent application, it can be used as a marketing tool. No one knows what you're going to end up actually getting at the patent office. And even if you get it, it doesn't mean that it's going to be enforceable, because chances are more than 70% patents get issued while they shouldn't have, right? And chances are no one is going to fight you unless you're making a lot of money from the patent. Otherwise, it's not going to be worth their money to go after you, right?
Yeah. When I do a lot of patent searches just because sometimes I find it's a good early signal of what big companies are thinking about. I do a lot of it around food technology. And what I found is there's obviously a lot of big companies that are just filing tons of patents. They have big research departments. A good example of that is Amazon. And another good example of that is Microsoft, technology companies. And it seems like a lot of times these guys will file patents for ideas they never use. One example, and I don't know if Amazon's going to do this, but they have literally, I think, an issued patent. At least they've applied for a patent for a package delivery system that would go underground in tubes. Who knows if Amazon's ever going to do this crazy idea? It sounds like an interesting idea to me. But clearly someone in Amazon said, hey, we should at least put this patent idea out there. So if we ever decide to do it. So with regards to big companies, they're just thinking about potential businesses. They're hedging their bets to a certain degree for ideas they may eventually go into. Why do guys like Amazon do so many patent applications?
Yeah, so lots of reasons, lots of reasons, right? So I actually head a patent review board at Caterpillar for the autonomy and automation division. So I manage teams in US, India, Australia, New Zealand, worldwide. So I actually sit and decide with a team which should we pursue patents or not. And I've done that for different companies, in consulting basis or things like that. So lots of things, right? And so one, they could have a lot of money that year, right? That they need to spend. If they don't spend, they're not going to get that budget next year. That's one. Other thing, they could maybe thinking about diversifying new offerings or whatnot. Three, maybe they could be potentially interested in, acquiring a company and, having some IP or something, or they want to sue another company doing something, even not similar, but they can create this as a common denominator to trade with it for cross-licensing or something like that, right? Some people do that. But there are three different models really for licensing, right? So there are companies that are freedom to operate companies, right? Like these are the companies, they just file for patents so that, they protect their own development, right? And that's companies like, Caterpillar or things like that or whatnot, right? And there are companies that, develop IP like Qualcomm or ARM for both, for development and for licensing, right? To license for others. And there are companies truly just file for patents without much of an intention to do anything about it, like intellectual ventures, and some refer to them, as, the T word. So companies like Amazon is not a patent troll, and if they do file a patent, they don't have the intention of trolling people with it.
Do sometimes guys like Amazon file patents because they anticipate a potential competitor may go into that business and they want to head it off? And they may never ever want to do that themselves, but they say, hey, for some reason FedEx is going to do an underground delivery network. I think we're competing with them from a logistics standpoint. Let's at least patent that idea.
Well, Amazon is a notoriously huge company and notorious in offering new businesses and getting into new businesses every single day, right? So
right. But they don't enter nearly as many businesses as they patent. They get 20 patents issued per Monday, every Monday or Tuesday. It's crazy.
Yeah. And that's actually fairly normal for a company. So two things here. One, right? A lot of the S&P 500 companies, actually more than 95% of their market cap is in their intangible assets, right? And intangible assets is actually on the top of that list is in intellectual capital. And on the top of that list is actually, patents, right? So by creating all these patents, actually Microsoft was recently labeled as the most intangible company in the world. When their market cap was at $2.5 trillion, 1.8 of that was attributed to their intangible assets, which is their brand as Microsoft, which, their intellectual property, which this and that and the other, so just you having these patents, it actually helps you a lot, in terms of, growing shareholder value, protecting, your innovation, diving into new spaces, and also some companies are choosing to get into assertion, for example, to actually go sue others, because the world now is becoming a lot more integrated. People are now offering more things. Innovation today is actually less of, truly groundbreaking innovation and more of an integration kind of solution, right? Like no one really invents new fire or sand, or this or that. Like people just, integrate and cross-pollinate, right? So chances are you're going to be touching someone else's IP, at some point, right? So if you can get your hands on some solid IP, even if it's futuristic, even if it might not be relevant, who knows? You will have it for 20 years and, it's not a bad bargain, for you if you choose, to actually do something about it, right? But chances are, more than 99% of the patents, that get issued are actually not worth the money that went into creating them. Yet people still choose, to pursue it, because the 1% left, have more than, like the 1% left actually, we basically call those the crown jewels, right? Those capture more than 50% of a value of the whole patents, out there, right? And that ends up being extremely valuable for companies and, protect their investors and create a barrier to entry for other competitors and whatnot.
All right. So you manage IP management and intellectual property portfolios for a large company, but you've also kind of done it on the other end where you've actually applied for a patent. You have an issued patent in the area of food and cooking. So this is an area of passion for you. You're interested in food and cooking. Yep. That's kind of how we connected. Very briefly describe that process, like the idea of like what you wanted to patent, how you went about it.
So since I came to the U.S., as an exchange student, in 2009, I was 183 pounds as a 17-year-old. I went to school in the South. I jumped up to 250 pounds, in 2-3 years. And I didn't even notice it, because so much was changing around me. But, I started as an engineering major and I was like, wow, we have all this cool tech in the world. I can actually use this, to make people eat better, and I was truly inspired, by the future that I could create and people who are thinking like me to actually use technology, to hash out an ecosystem that I want to be part of that will help people to have, customized, made to order food wherever you go, right? So I put a lot of these ideas, in a patent application and, they were kind of the juice extract of some of the things that I wanted to do, And one of the ideas that I had in mind is that more than 60% of the produce, that gets produced gets wasted before it gets to your plate, right? One of the things that I have done, in that patent is I actually, I have an antenna that allows you to see through produce without any light, within millions of like 1/1,000,000th of a second, and using very, very simple data and very simple hardware, you can actually see through produce like an apple or an orange and things like that. You can detect how fresh it is or not. You can detect what kind of apple it is. You can detect how much shelf life it has. You can detect if there's a worm, if there's a disease in it or things like that, using very simple physics, right?
So what was the original idea? I mean, you gained a lot of weight. You wanted to use technology and to maybe help people to manage their food intake better, and you used some sort of you had an idea for automation. What was you started thinking I need a patent there. What was it?
So the patent had a made to order automated food system and all the ecosystem around it, right? So basically, it was a system that has an inventory management module. You'll put your pieces of produce in there. And then basically you can do simple cuts on demand, even if you're not around it, right? So you can talk to the system and say, hey, how many apples do I have? Using a camera and a TensorFlow, using the antennas I have, you're like, hey, you have 2 granny apples, you have 3 onions, 3 this, that, right? You're like, hey, make me a salad, and then basically it will take, a few minutes to do slicing and dicing and French frying and julienning, and mix your salad or something. Let's say you're at work and you want to head home, but by the time you want to head home, you want to have your meal prep done, right? So I wanted to have something to do that. But also, I wanted to create the whole ecosystem that allows me to use this machine wherever I go, right? So I want to make it easier for people to have access to this machine, right? I also thought of, connecting your smartwatch to it, connecting your scale using IoT sensors to it, allowing your doctor to see how you've been eating, right? To generate data from areas where data was never been generated before. After you buy your produce from the supermarket, no one knows what happened to your tomato. No one knows what happens to your apple. But if it can, tell you that this apple, was sliced and diced in that day, this apple went to compost, you ate this apple at that time, right? And things like that. That means something. That means something to growers. That means something to people who are producing produce, using even the antenna technology, I developed to even sort produce better, to make it live longer and allow it to be used by more people, to help eliminate food deserts, to allow you to eat however you want to eat, wherever you go. Mike can be in Japan tomorrow, and can log into the app and see someone has their machine. And then you can buy, your food from them. You can see the reviews. You can see if they're open to have a conversation.
So did you intend this as a machine to be used in a consumer kitchen or to be used in a professional environment?
So actually both. So I was developing, the intention was to develop a vertical, technology hardware platform, that can be spun out into different things. I care for this technology to be in your fridge, to be, at some point initially before it's in your fridge as kind of, a countertop device, just like, a Keurig machine or something like that, right? Or an industrial scale, right? Like some elements of it can be expanded, for industrial scale. Just the antenna module can be put on a conveyor belt in a big factory to sort out, a piece of produce, right? We can use water jets to kind of, cut food, clean food or things in certain ways, right? You can use the compostable, A4 paper that is like kind of origami style to actually dispense and put the food in it, or the juice or whatever it is that you're producing in it, right? So this was the goal of the whole thing.
You had a lot of ideas packed into this one patent, and then there's certain like subcomponents, which I think you've talked about maybe getting individual patents for. So talk about from the time you came up with the original idea to how long you applied. Did you write it yourself? How long did this process take to file the patent? And then how long did it take before it got issued?
Sure. So I started in 2016. I documented a lot of the idea myself. I created diagrams myself. And then I hired an attorney that used to work for Perkins Coie before, but went as an individual contractor. He drafted the patent for me. And actually, it took about in 2020, June 2020, I received a patent allowance. Actually, the patent was issued in March 2020. In June 2020, the patent got issued without a single office action, which was incredible. Typically that examiner that examined my patent has an 80% rejection rate. So he rejects patents, quite a lot. But no one gets finally rejected if they keep fighting the patent office. You initially get like an unfinal rejection. They give you a certain prior art and give you a little cheat sheet on how to avoid, this prior art to get your claims through. But my claims, I've done my homework, very much so to know that there's no one, was in the space doing what I was doing. And the examiner actually was very fond of the antenna idea.
They will guide you through, like, hey, you're taking a test and like, you don't pass the first time. It's like your teacher is saying, hey, this is how you pass it. Like kind of how to thread the needle on getting a patent issued.
Yes. So, I mean, it really depends on the examiner. Some of them are very cooperative, and they basically, here's what they say, right? So when you have certain claims, they go study the field and they're like, hey, there's this reference and that reference and that reference, reads on your current claims, right? If you can avoid these three references, you can actually get a patent. So some people can do that effectively. Some people can't. Right? Sometimes you can have an interview with an examiner and things like that. He's not going to let you have something that you shouldn't have, but he just tells you what's blocking you from getting the patent, right? And you can follow the instructions to actually avoid these, to clear out these blocks, right? And then you now will have a patent. It will be narrower in terms of a claim scope than what you originally have because of these blocks, but you will eventually get a patent. Does that make sense? In my case, the initial claims that I had ended up the same claims that I got allowed and issued with an examiner that has an 80% rejection rate because I have done my homework and the field is very clear and the idea is actually that groundbreaking.
One of the things I find interesting is, we write a lot about, obviously, just technology. We write a lot about also just business models. We write a lot about like food, like here's a new food, novel food ingredient. All these things are patentable. Like you can patent a new way of making a protein. You can patent like a new antenna. Also, like business model innovation is also patentable. Like the idea behind Airbnb or Uber, right? Like you could get a patent for that. But the span of things you can have as a patentable thing is really pretty immense.
There's the U.S. patent law, 101, which basically says, whoever invents, an idea or process, or anything like, the like, right? Or like it says, whoever invents or discovers an eligible invention may obtain only one patent, right? But basically, it covers like the basic, like whoever discovers a new and useful process, machine, manufacture, or composition of matter, or any new and useful improvement thereof may obtain a patent application, right? The business method application is actually captured under something called CBM patents, right? So there is a specific section in patent law called CBM dedicated for business models. Typically, it doesn't carry that much weight. It's harder to kind of, enforce. But it does exist. If you're a big enough company, like Airbnb or Uber, you can probably enforce that. For a small company, you probably won't.
You do consult people in terms of like patents. You'll help startups, and I think it's great because you've done your own. You also manage it for a large company. How can people find out more about what you do? Where can they find out more information about you?
Yeah, so people can reach out directly to me on LinkedIn. It's actually, so my business has been very successful that I didn't even need a website, this far. Like I typically have like more business, that I can handle, but I'm always open to collaborate and work with, the right people. I'm very, very picky in who I want to work with because one, I have certain like morals and ethics, that I don't want to enable patent trolls. That's one. I care to help, small time inventors who actually want to build something that people will use, love, and pay for, right? Or a lot of people will use even if they don't pay for and things like that, right? So I do care, to work on things that will solve fundamental real world problems, right? And I'm working, quite a few of those and having a lot of fun, with a lot of very impressive, set of people all the way, from Fortune 50 companies to, like a very small startup that is pre-seed. But, when I choose to work with someone, I fully engage myself in it and, bring them a lot of support, and I really help them, drive things through fruition.
Your name is ANAS and Alfarra, ALFARRA. If you want to learn more about Anas, find him on LinkedIn. Hey, thank you so much for taking time today.
Yep, of course. Thank you for having me.